if you can walk us through how you've implemented, ChatGPT into some private equity-backed businesses, please. Welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. On today's podcast is Beth Pollack, a specialist operating partner focusing on data and artificial intelligence. This is a cracker. Let's dive in and explore how you could be utilizing AI. Beth, if you can share a brief insight into you, please.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm an applied AI and data strategy operating partner of two decades experience building some form of decision system. I support private equity firms and their portfolio companies in both advisory and interim leadership capacity, thinking about the best ways to create value through top line and through efficiency with data and AI.
Perfect. Well, AI is a very popular conversation in the world at the moment. But before we get kicked in, what's one mistake that you see private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what would you suggest to correct them?
Yeah, I mean, there's more than one, but I think there's a few that I might highlight. The number one is trying to start exclusively with generative AI. Versus kind of defining a problem objectively and then leveraging a tool, like a suite of tools to be able to achieve that, and solve the problem. So, most powerful outcomes end up being a combination of process change, product change, machine learning, and generative AI. And so, taking a step back and really understanding and quantifying the bigger opportunity, and then choosing your first initiative, not just a proof of concept, but something small, but that is a building block towards that larger problem. I think that's like one of the big mistakes. Another one I would just say is focusing on just model optimization versus something you and I have talked about, which is understanding how what you're building will integrate into the workflow. And I think because my mix of both product background and AI experience has helped a lot with kind of making sure what you're building actually gets in the hands of the users, which leads to another one, which is making sure you're engaging everyone upfront. So, not making it a science experiment, but including all stakeholders in the process, not set somewhere separate in a corner, but making sure they're involved. And then, the last one I'll say is, starting an AI project or hiring a large branding consulting firm without a chaperone, whether that be internally or that could be somebody that's neutral and external to make sure that you're working on the right problems and keeping things in line and really aligned with the objectives of the organization.
Interesting. I think we've gone through this internally in the business, and we're talking before we jumped on with regards to some of the changes we've made, and building that workflow, as you mentioned, as a really important step. But one thing I was really surprised about, which obviously you won't be, Beth, but how many platform of I just look at ChatGPT and then I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But the whole world that goes behind ChatGPT and how the basics of it is. So it's really about looking at what tools will actually help you, and all the different machine learning and everything else that you mentioned is just so important.
Yeah, and that's what's happening with agentic workflows, right? Which is to say, break the problem into smaller pieces and solve it specific to that subcomponent, whether it be machine learning or analytics or actually using a large language model where it's only mostly where it's used best and most reliable.
So AI has been around for quite some time, but it's only become mainstream recently. What got you into it in the first place? Because it wasn't, as reference, it wasn't cool 10 years ago, or however long you said you've been involved in this. So what got you down that path?
20 plus, right?
20 plus years.
And
wow.
So and you quoted me on this when we kind of started this conversation, which is I've been a nerd for a really long time, and now it's starting to be cool, was the way that you heard what I said. But I've always been a data person. I started on trading floors. There was six, one of these, I had 6 computer screens and a ton of disparate amount of information, and it was how are we making decisions around here? Let's really focus on what's most systematic. And I worked with the, engineers and nerds to start building things. This is before product management existed. And this was when it was called data mining, before it was called machine learning, before it was called AI. And so, I've always looked at this process. My advisory firm is called Decision Science Advisors, but I really have this focus on decisions, internal decisions and decisions on our customers, and how that drives our ability to drive top line, and just also improve efficiency in companies.
To protect investors through bad hires for your portfolio company, I've collated into a brand new book some of the top tips and processes investors use to ensure they do not hire those bad hires into their portfolio companies. We are giving the book for free for the first 100 people that join the waiting list. So please check out the show notes and get your name down for a free copy. Well, I know that you've been doing some big projects for various different private equity firms and their portfolio companies, but if you can walk us through how you've implemented, ChatGPT into some private equity backed businesses, please.
Yeah, sure. Like one recent example that I'm particularly proud of, but then also it speaks to what I spoke about earlier, which is creating a program, not only thinking of generative AI exclusively. We were able to go from a plan to 2% EBITDA margin to 12% EBITDA margin within 1 year, with no incremental budget change, so no incremental spend. And in this case, I got involved extremely early on in the process before the check had even cleared, very early. The deal team had underwritten an efficiency gain over a 5-year period of time and kind of brought me in to think about the how. And so it ended up being a combination of process change, product change, machine learning, and generative AI. It's a healthcare company that is clinician focused, tech enabled services. The machine learning took a combination of clinical data sources and create a probability score of the likelihood of a disease or a condition. And the generative AI we use to scan through medical records in combination with well-defined knowledge base defining conditions to identify conditions and then supporting evidence for those. And so, machine learning allows you to focus on what's really important, and the generative AI highlights places instead of having to read a 100-page long document and then compare it to 150-page long knowledge graph where you might be missing things. And so that creates efficiency, but really that allowed them to enter new markets that they weren't able to enter in the past, which drove top line growth as well. And then importantly, identified conditions that a human might have missed, which is really important to, not only creating value for the company, but also to the outcome of the patient.
So I think everybody's probably listening to that and going, right, how do we get that into our organization? For that to happen, what is it as simple as you coming and looking and going, right, let's have a look at your workflows and see how things are going, and then implementing things in? What's that kind of scenario, but also what's the kind of investment that's needed in order to deploy these strategies? Because I think that's probably, certainly wasn't unknown for us before we started doing things.
Yeah, and you don't often know what the investment is until you really put things down on paper, and again, in this case, I give the deal team a lot of credit because they identified there's an opportunity. They just didn't know exactly how. And for somebody like me, that's often stressful. You're like, okay, well, we've underrated in a use case. Now, how do you figure it out? I think the number one way to have the most impact is to gain the trust of the people that have the most information. So of course, it starts with the C-level, and them kind of understanding I'm coming from the right place. I was on Wall Street for a long time. I'm doing this because I love to do it and I love helping companies, especially with healthcare. I spend a lot of time from a mission perspective, also because it's really complicated and I'm a glutton for punishment for a complicated problem. But starting with gaining trust, really listening and understanding what their pain points are, and then getting down from the C-level down to the people who are doing the work. I think that's critically important. Now, we initially started by we want to explore generative AI use cases specific to, this pain point of reading through the medical conditions. They had some form of identification of probability scoring that was already within the organization. And so kind of leveraging what people had already, identifying the talent that's already there, kind of supplementing the gaps, and then creating a holistic problem. And if you ask the CEO, he said, he's like, we've had a lot of these ideas, you've pulled them out of us, but the way that we are able to actually make the change is your ability to quantify the opportunity. And so healthcare specifically has a very large change management aspect of things where it's hard for people to change their workflows. It's also high risk, similar to trading floors and private equity firms because there's so much money at stake. But putting those numbers down on paper, a business plan in a credible way, not just for a proof of concept, but for a larger vision, has really helped bring all the parties that need to be involved together in order to achieve this. Because data is very much a team sport. It's and so you need growth involved. You need the chief clinical officer who initially called AI the magic box to really be engaged. And then once you start unlocking that, and once people see the vision, they start opening up. And that's where I was able to identify kind of like a meaningful process change and get all the different parties involved to get aligned with it, and then collectively work together on a presentation for the board to get approval for the budget. And the budget size, money doesn't solve the problem. Defining the problem well is the most important component. We were able to do this extremely inexpensively. Similar to what I said, we kind of, in this case, we had speed to value by repurposing a third-party software that already existed as the front end that we could use for clinicians to be able to touch and feel things. And then we leveraged an internal team, those internal analysts, to be able to, build on the kind of machine learning they've already done. And we supplemented that with some experts.
Interesting. So it all begins with that kind of, all the alignment, identifying a problem, and then also utilizing, obviously, the data side of things, which...
Yeah, and the internal people, and really bringing them together as a team. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick mention of a long-standing partnership with Grata. As you will probably know, the private equity scene is constantly evolving, and deal flow is moving now to proprietary and data-driven processes. Grata provides you with the data and information of over 7 million private companies. So if you're looking to improve your proprietary deal flow and improve the data access, then reach out to Grata today. Now back to the podcast. AI was explained to me at a conference as transitioning it, some things take years to transition, and AI has kind of exploded onto the scene and the development. And somebody showed me some weird, it was either Will Smith or Michael Jordan, and it was like some crazy video. And
You're so good at this.
Then they showed it later on, and it was like, it was, you could believe that it was potentially him. And they were like seeing that as kind of 6 months tracks. You who've been in it for such a long period of time, and then up banging your head against the wall of going, guys, we need to adopt this. And then, suddenly the market changed. Timing's everything, isn't it? Yeah. But what are you seeing with regards to that acceleration period? Is that kind of things are really, really moving forward on a 6-monthly basis of transformation? Or is that just on what I regard as a commercial, you can copy my...
Are you saying technological innovation? Is that what you're... Yeah, I mean... It's rapid in a few ways. It's rapid in the like deceleration of costs, which is make things more accessible. It's rapid in kind of like attempted productization, and that's either kind of with third parties, with these large players like the AWS and Googles and the Microsofts of the world, that where you already have it sitting on your platform for your data, and I think it's rapid with even the consulting firms starting to try to like create centralized infrastructure that can be re-leverageable code, so they're not doing everything for the first time. And so, and what we talked about earlier is we've come to a place of some stability, even though there's rapid change, where there's been enough active use cases where it's become credible. People have started to use it on their own individually enough to build some kind of like comfort level with it, and costs have come down in order to make it accessible. And this idea of like LLM ops, very similar to ML ops, in order to be able to maintain the stability of this, all of those have kind of come to a place where you can build things in a credible way, where pieces that are flexible to be able to be swapped in and out as technology evolves. And there's also open source and technology now that does things like helps you optimize the model you're choosing based on the problem you're asking. And so, these allow you to have more comfort with actually making an investment, as long as you build it in a flexible way. And that wasn't the case 6 months ago.
Where would you suggest that, partners, managing partners, principals, guys that are, the deal leads, start to think about this? Because it's easy as going, you need to go into AI, but then you look at it and you're like, I've gone on ChatGPT, I've asked it a question of what I should do. It's come up with some ridiculous answer and I don't know what I'm doing. That tends to be the general first step, which is useless as I've done that a million times.
Yeah.
What would you
By the
start
way,
to
though,
say?
it's powerful for some things, but
Yeah.
not for this overall workflow to impact long-term, meaningful, truly change-oriented growth of your companies. I think a couple of things for first steps is first for private equity firms to make sure that data and AI people are involved in the diligence process if possible. So like still, if and I work across private equity firms, I study this as like like something that I care a lot about and trying to perfect in my own way, just like in the pursuit of excellence, is that there are technical people, but they're not necessarily data and AI people that are involved before you write the check, which means two things. And this is happening to me a ton of times, which is you're buying the dream without really understanding how they're set up and if there could be a meaningful investment in the data or the infrastructure before you're ready to be able to optimize the dream. So I think, and then two, you might miss a deal because you're zeroing out potential value because you haven't felt a comfort level with being able to underwrite it. And so, I think that's the number one thing that private equity firms can do. And that helps with the value creation plan. And so I think, that's stage one. And then, I think as far as doing the assessment of your portfolio companies to see where there's opportunity, you just making sure that voice is involved in the process as well. And generally people start with, okay, only new investments, but I've been able to have transformational impact with companies close to exit as well. Partially in the process of defining that dream, that other people will execute, but doing it in a highly credible way.
Nice, I appreciate that. What do you read, Beth? What do you watch? What do you listen to that you recommend others check out?
Yeah, so I think number one is and this is also growing up as an OTC trader, is, talking to other practitioners is still my number one way. People who are in the weeds, a network of people that I trust, that trust me, that are open and sharing about what they're doing and what's working, and most importantly, what's not working. And then, of course, like everyone else, the Substacks, the Mediums, LinkedIn related to kind of like these key people that are part of my network that I really trust and respect. Podcasts, there are kind of like two sections of them, other than, of course, the private equity podcast. But number one is, like more technical podcasts. Obviously, I went to MIT. Lex Friedman has always been my favorite. Some of them, he has diversity of the things that he talks about, but he'll get highly technical. Like there's just a great one on Perplexity with their CEO talking about the history of LLMs that was 3+ hours long, but like very inspiring about both building and kind of like the history and the future of search and LLM and knowledge. And then AI on AI is another one that I listen to that I find very kind of like scan through to find people who are highly technical talking about the science and the technology. And then on the PE side, I'm very growth oriented. So I listen to Growth Investor by Growth Cap, and I listen to Andreessen podcasts. And kind of just a scan around for things that are relevant.
Thank you very much for sharing. And Beth, if anybody wishes to reach out, post this podcast, how best do they get in touch with you, please?
LinkedIn's an easy, great way to find me. It's Beth Pollack. The name of my company is Decision Science Advisors. I'd love to talk to anyone and just compare notes, see how I might help.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the podcast, Beth. Give us a brief insight, or detailed insight, should I say, into the world of artificial intelligence. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you. So much potential, but so many, places where wrong turns can be made.
Absolutely. Well, we've done enough of that myself. So, and thank you very much for all of our listeners for again tuning into the podcast here at Raw Selections Private Equity Podcast. Comes out every single week, so do make sure that you are subscribed. But till the next time, keep smashing it. And thank you very much for listening.